He didn't just reshape economics. He reshaped how governments understand fear, authority, and money itself. John Maynard Keynes wasn't a statesman or a revolutionary in the traditional sense. He was something rarer, a thinker who taught entire nations how to spend their way out of despair. For centuries, debt was treated like a moral failing. Deficits were signs of weakness. Balanced budgets were considered virtuous, a kind of fiscal purity. Then Keynes flipped the moral compass. He argued that government spending during hardship wasn't irresponsible, it was necessary. He made borrowing sound like duty and saving sound harmful. And with that, he quietly rewired the inner mechanics of capitalism. Welcome to The Financial Historian, where money, power, and history intersect. And nothing is ever as simple as it seems. Our story begins amid the wreckage of the Great Depression. Picture the world in 1930. Banks collapsing, factories idle, millions out of work. The old economic doctrine, rooted in Adam Smith and the invisible hand, insisted the market would self-correct. Prices would fall, demand would rise, and equilibrium would return. But theory can't feed starving families. In reality, demand stayed dead, factories stayed shut. People, terrified of losing everything, stopped spending altogether. The economy wasn't healing, it was paralyzed. This was the world Keynes examined when he realized something revolutionary. Markets aren't flawless, and they don't always repair themselves. Sometimes they fall into a loop of fear. When households stop spending, companies stop hiring. When companies stop hiring, incomes fall. When incomes fall, spending collapses even further. A downward spiral, an economic vacuum. Keynes understood that the problem during recessions wasn't waste or carelessness. It was the absence of demand, the lifeblood of the system. In simple terms, recessions occur when everyone tries to save simultaneously. And ironically, that collective caution drags everyone down. One person's spending is another person's paycheck. When spending dies, the economy flatlines. So Keynes put forward a heresy. When private demand evaporates, public demand must replace it. The government should borrow, spend, hire, build, and pump money back into circulation. Spending creates jobs. Jobs generate income. Income fuels consumption, and consumption revives the system. To traditional economists, this sounded insane. Governments weren't supposed to interfere. Deficits were dangerous. Debt was a poison. But Keynes wasn't praising debt, he was saying timing mattered. He insisted governments act counter to the economic cycle, spend in downturns, save in good times. Stimulate and restrain, a rhythm, not a constant. He used a simple analogy. The economy is like a car. In normal times, the private sector drives. When the engine stalls, the government must turn the key and add fuel until it restarts. Then it steps away. In 1936, Keynes published the general theory of employment, interest, and money, turning his insights into a complete framework. He introduced aggregate demand, total spending by households, businesses, and the government. If that demand falls, so does production and employment. The only cure is boosting spending until confidence returns, but for Keynes, this wasn't just mathematics. Economics was psychology. Markets moved not by logic, but by what he called animal spirits, the hopes and fears that push people to invest or hoard. You can't fix those with formulas. You fix them with collective action. Government spending not only buys materials, it broadcasts confidence. It tells the public, recovery is coming. That belief becomes economic fuel. That was Keynes's insight. Recessions end not with austerity, but with restored confidence. Yet his ideas didn't spread instantly. In the early 1930s, leaders clung to old doctrines of restraint. Britain returned to the gold standard, suffocating its exports. Germany imposed brutal austerity, deepening its crisis and paving the way for extremism. And in the US, President Hoover refused bold intervention, trusting the market to self-correct. It didn't. By 1933, unemployment had hit 25%. Banks collapsed, evaporating life savings. The free market froze. That's when Franklin D. Roosevelt arrives. Not an economist, but a leader whose instincts aligned with Keynes. He wasn't yet preaching Keynesianism, but he embraced its core message. When fear stops people from spending, the government must step in. Roosevelt's New Deal wasn't one program, it was an entire worldview. Massive public works like the TVA and Hoover Dam employed millions. The WPA hired teachers, artists, laborers. The government became the country's main customer, injecting wages straight into the economy's bloodstream. Slowly, demand revived, confidence strengthened. America began to recover, not fully but significantly. Still, something even larger and darker would prove Keynes right beyond question: war. World War II forced governments to do exactly what Keynes had long urged: spend without hesitation. Factories reopened, this time to produce weapons. Governments borrowed relentlessly. And for the first time, global crisis and full employment existed side by side. The irony was cruel. Total war became the ultimate Keynesian experiment, and it worked. Production surged. Wages rose, economies roared to life while the world burned. It wasn't prosperity, but it was proof. After the war, Keynes's vision didn't just win, it dominated. But success hid a growing risk: dependency. The more governments used spending to stabilize the economy, the harder it became to stop. Politicians loved stimulus but hated saving. Keynes's rule, run deficits in bad times, surpluses in good times, was forgotten. By the late 1960s, the system overheated. Prices climbed, wages followed. The delicate balance slipped. Then the oil shocks of the 1970s hit. Stagflation, high unemployment and high inflation shattered the Keynesian playbook. Governments tried spending their way out, but this time stimulus fueled inflation. Confidence collapsed. Keynesian faith faded. A new doctrine emerged: monetarism, led by Milton Friedman. They blamed heavy government intervention and insisted inflation came from too much money in circulation. Keynes seemed defeated. But economic ideas don't disappear, they evolve. Even as austerity, deregulation, and tight money took over, the core Keynesian principle, government intervention, remained embedded, waiting for the next crisis. That crisis arrived in 2008, when global markets imploded. Governments instantly revived Keynes's methods: bailouts, stimulus, quantitative easing. Central banks printed unprecedented sums. Rates fell to zero. Governments didn't just support the economy, they became the economy, and it worked at first. Collapse was prevented, confidence returned, markets soared. But the recovery exposed a flaw. Keynes imagined government spending reaching workers and industries. But in the modern era, money flowed into financial markets instead of households. It inflated asset prices, not wages. Inequality soared. The engine restarted, but it now powered the wrong part of the system. Then came the pandemic. Keynes was resurrected in full. Governments spent on a scale once unimaginable. Money was deposited directly into accounts. Central banks printed trillions. It was Keynesianism with no restraint, a global fiscal surge. For a moment, it looked miraculous. Unemployment plunged, markets boomed. Even with the world shut down, economies pulsed. But the bill returned, inflation surged. Supply chains buckled. And once again, Keynes's medicine created new weaknesses. The tool meant to stabilize capitalism had become the foundation of the entire system. Today, nearly a century after the general theory, Keynes's ideas are everywhere, and that is the dilemma. Every slowdown triggers the same responses: stimulate, borrow, spend, inflate, repeat. Each rescue makes the economy more dependent, more indebted, more fragile. Governments no longer act as spenders of last resort. They are the spenders of first resort, and often the only ones remaining. Politicians use Keynesianism without its discipline. Deficits and booms and busts alike. Spending not to stabilize, but to secure power. Keynes's balanced vision, stimulus with restraint, has been replaced with permanent intervention. And yet, his brilliance remains undeniable. Keynes didn't hand governments a blank check. He handed them a philosophy. He showed that economics runs on confidence, trust, and belief. When people lose faith in tomorrow, they stop spending. And when spending stops, economies die. Keynes built a system to keep belief alive. But here's the haunting twist. Modern economies run on belief, without limits. The medicine meant for emergencies became a constant drip. Each crisis brings another dose. And each dose lowers the system's tolerance for pain. Today, markets don't fear recession. They fear the withdrawal of stimulus. Keynes once wrote, "In the long run, we are all dead." He meant it as a challenge, urging governments to act in the short run, not wait for distant corrections. Over time, it became an excuse to push consequences endlessly forward, and that is the paradox of John Maynard Keynes. He didn't kill capitalism. He revived it repeatedly. But in saving it, he made it more fragile, more dependent, more sensitive to shock. The man who taught governments to spend also taught them how easily restraint can be forgotten. If this changed the way you see the past, hit subscribe. History has the answers. I'll show you where to find them.